Who's that? Commander Claw. Who's bad? Commander Claw.
First of all, big shout outs to all the viewers out there on my channel lately and to the ones that saw my post with a poll on choosing which video for the next deck tech, and the winner obviously is Teval, Arbiter of Virtue. I did see Betor kin to all as second place, but this is the one that won. I also want to thank you guys for helping me improve my deck building skills on Moxfield, because I had to learn how to be more efficient with my ideas and the keyboard commands to make the deck list. So I will be honest with you, I always hated making deck lists because I am very tedious and indecisive at times on making decks. But with your help, you guys have made me improve my skills and confidence. So look forward to more deck techs. And yes, I will have to say this: Teval, Arbiter of Virtue, is a glass cannon commander, the most powerful commander from this set and the most exciting. I did get to play test it. I did mess around with it, and the name itself describes how you can play with it. It makes the final decision, and this commander is awesome. So without further ado, I do have the deck list in the description. The next slide will be what the commander is and all of her abilities, followed up by what I think the commander looks like. Then I'm going to get into the cards itself in the deck list. Let's get started. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And big shout outs to those who are on the poll. Hit the like button if you think this deck tech is awesome at any point in time. Otherwise, subscribe. So for 2 in Sultai colors, you got a 6/6 body, legendary spirit dragon, flying, lifelink. Spells you cast have delve, which means each card you exile from your graveyard while casting those spells pay for 1 colorless. Then it says, whenever you cast a spell, you lose life equal to its mana value. And you gotta love the flavor text, because once you start playing with this card, the flavor text makes sense. As you act, so shall you be judged. This card makes decisions. It makes decisions. And the decision is you will lose the game by your choice, or the pilot of the deck. So anyway, the pros of this card is it's evasive. It flies. That means if your opponent doesn't have a blocker that flies, they are in trouble. It has lifelink. So whenever it deals damage, you're gaining that much life, which is good because that offsets the bottom ability where it says whenever you cast a spell, you lose life equal to its mana value. Okay? That means every spell you play with Teval on the battlefield, you lose life. Every spell you play with Teval on the battlefield, you lose life. So that means you need to decide how and what cards you want to play and delve with. Because even a 2 CMC card spell, you will lose 2 life. So one of the biggest issues that you'll run into is you will lose life quickly if you haven't decided the sequencing of cards you want to play. Trust me, 2 adds up, 3 adds up, 4 adds up, and your opponent's attacking you adds up. Your life total can disappear quickly. So that's why big X spells are favorable with this card, and it just ends the game. And I really feel like this is a CEDH commander. But in this deck tech, you will find ways to gain life back quickly without relying on attacking with your commander. So let's talk a little bit more. So after playtesting, it just reminds me of Roxanne Starfall Savant, but the Sultai version. So if you don't know Roxanne, she mana ramps, she doubles the mana, and you're trying to cast your big X spells or big green spells or big red spells to end the game. This is the same thing with Teval, Arbiter of Virtue, but it's even better because it's Sultai and you can self-mill, load up your graveyard with cards that you can reanimate or return back to hand and ultimately cast at a cheaper price using Delve and make these X spells even bigger. Yes. So on to the deck tech and how I built it for y'all. So I know I've been mentioning big X spells, but I wanted to start off on a basic foundational way and to let players know on a fun way that you can cast a lot of big boy dragons effectively and efficiently. And it's fun. Let's be honest. Trying to cast a bunch of dragons is fun. Who doesn't like dragons? But anyway, in the deck tech, these dragons are 7 CMC. So generally, when you play with Teval and it's on the battlefield, you're going to pay either 2 something of a specific color, and you can delve 5 cards, and bam, what do you know? You lost 7 life, but you got a 7/6 dragon with flying on the battlefield in the example of Ancient Brass Dragon. And you know what, dragons have awesome abilities. So, for example, Ancient Brass Dragon, whenever Ancient Brass Dragon deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. When you do, put any number of target creatures with total mana value X or less from graveyards onto the battlefield under your control, where X is the result. That is disgusting. So, yeah, a 7 CMC dragon should have and will have a bunch of abilities that will end the game. Straight up. That's why I like Arbiter of Virtue. It makes decisions. Next up is Broodcaller Scourge. In this deck tech, I did add a lot of dragons from Tarkir Dragonstorm, so do expect to see those. For 7 mana, 5 and 2 green, 5/7 dragon, flying. It says whenever one or more dragons you control deal combat damage to a player, you may put a permanent card with mana value less than or equal to the damage from your hand onto the battlefield. This is something that green does very well. It just says, hey, I have something in my hand, drop it onto the battlefield if you pay the high required mana cost. And heck, we're going to be playing a bunch of dragons anyway, but honestly, it only takes 1 dragon to deal 1 damage to put something on the battlefield. But it gets even better. If you hit all 3 of your opponents with 3 different dragons, yep, you get to put 3 different permanents onto the battlefield. Moving on to the biggest, baddest dragon that I recommend for this deck. Here we go. This card has got to be and going to be expensive. Colossal Grave Reaver for 6 and Golgari, 7/6 dragon. It has flying. Whenever this creature enters or attacks, mill 3 cards. That's right on theme here. We want to mill cards to load up our graveyard in order to delve and add more colorless mana to whatever spell we want to play. Then it says, whenever 1 or more creature cards are put into your graveyard from your library, put 1 of them onto the battlefield. This is disgusting. So, in general, when you self-mill using Colossal and you put a creature card from your library into your graveyard, that works. You know, you can put it on the battlefield with it. But also, if you just have another way to self-mill, or an opponent mills you and Colossal Graveyard is on the battlefield, this bottom trigger still triggers. And you get to put a creature from your library from your graveyard, uh, excuse me, from your library into the graveyard onto the battlefield. That's what I meant to say. So yeah, it just works all around. And this can happen multiple times. So realistically, if you have several triggers of milling going on and this is on the battlefield, you can just drop all type of creatures onto the battlefield at one point in time. Disgusting. Moving on to my favorite card in this deck tech. Hidegetsu and Kairi for 2 and 2 blue and a black, 5/4 body, ogre, demon, dragon. Remember, I said dragon, so we got dragon synergies going on here. It's a 5/4 flyer. It says when it enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. That's a brainstorm right there. Okay. Then it says when Hidegetsu and Kairi dies, exile the top card of your library. Target opponent loses life equal to its mana value. Okay. If it's an instant or sorcery card, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. This card goes so well with Teval because you already brainstormed the top of your deck. You know what cards you're going to put back on your library or on your library, right? We're going to put a probably a creature that is high CMC, which all the dragons that are in this deck tech, high CMC. So when we have Hidegetsu die either by our own will or by opponent making us kill a creature, hey, we flipped over a giant dragon that has 8 mana and we're dealing 8 damage to a target opponent. But the card gets even better because If it's an instant or sorcery card, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. Win-win. Let me show you an example. So we just got done talking about Colossal Graveweaver. Look at it. 8 CMC total. If you flip that over, your opponent is losing 8 life. They don't want that to happen. This is just almost like a rattlesnake effect. If your opponent just wants to just destroy your creature, which you're going to be forced to, because it's a 5/4 flyer. Let's not forget that. It's a target. Wow! Flip this over after it dies. 8 life is lost. Enough said. Moving on to a awesome Tarkir Dragon deck. So we got Teval the Balance Scale for 1 in Sultai, 4/4 Spirit Dragon. Flying. Y'all should know this by now because this has been blasted all over YouTube. This is probably like the most popular card ever from this set. It's busted. Okay, 4/4 flyer. It says whenever it attacks, mill 3 cards. Then you may return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Okay, so you self-mill, then return a land from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. That's mana ramping on a card. Okay, it gets better. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 2/2 black zombie druid creature token. That's awesome because essentially when you attack, you made a land leave your graveyard and you create a 2/2 black zombie druid creature token. And guess what? Zombies are relevant. And now that they add druid to the creature type, it's even more relevant. There's a bunch of cards out there that do stuff because you have the druid creature type. They're not in this deck tech, but y'all know who they are. I'm sure y'all watched other videos. Moving on to the most important thing that I recommend for Teval Arbiter of Virtue. So, if you're new to Magic, welcome to the fight mechanic. The fight mechanic is going to be the most important mechanic for this deck. The reason why is when you play this commander, you lose life for each spell you play. That's every spell you play, you are losing life. So, you need to gain life. So, initially, you're probably thinking the only way you can gain life is through attacking with a 6/6 flyer with lifelink. Okay, that is almost too risky most of the time and too obvious to see from your opponents. So, one way to mitigate the obviousness is to have a fight spell. And fight spells deal damage equal to its power to the creature. And yes, when a creature has lifelink and it fights another creature, you gain life. Bam! I have solved your issue. I have solved your issue. So I want you to imagine this. Teval is on the battlefield and you've lost 4 life casting a spell, right? You will lose life for casting a fight spell. However, you gain life for the damage done and the power that Teval has. So, for example, if you use Ancient Animus, which is 1 in green, put a +1/+1 counter on creature you control if it's legendary. Okay, check. Teval will become a 7/7. Then it fights target creature an opponent controls. Cool. If you fight a little 1/1 creature, you will gain 7 life. So you lost 2 life for casting Ancient Animus, and for the example I said earlier, you lost, I believe it was like 5 life or 4 life. Cool. You're back at maybe -1 or 0 mana. Sometimes you're even more, depending on the scenario. Uh, so yeah, this is a way to mitigate life loss for casting spells when you're trying to close out the game. And next up is my favorite card here, Decisive Denial. For green and a blue, it's an instant. It is a counter spell. Okay, first of all, it says choose one. Target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. Cool, fight spell. But also counter target non-creature spell unless the controller pays 3. You got a modal card right here. Moving on to an example. So like I said, Teval's a 6/6. You deal 6 damage. But don't forget, you can boost its power and toughness by adding aura enchantments or +1/+1 counters. So imagine if Teval is a 12/12 and you use a fight spell. You will gain 12 life and possibly destroy whatever chunk creature that's out there. So to pay 2 mana and have a 12/12 deal 12 damage, you are +10 on life. Not bad, not bad. Moving on to the next card. So in this deck tech, I wanted you to make copies of whatever favorite dragon that you have in this deck. And that dragon has to be non-legendary, but thanks to this set, there are a bunch of non-legendary dragons that are amazing. Let me introduce you to Aggressive Biomancy for XX green and blue. It's a sorcery. Create X tokens that are copies of target creature you control, except that they have when this creature enters the battlefield, it fights up to one target creature you don't control. So let's say we have Teval out on the battlefield and another dragon that we want to copy. Maybe like the Colossal Grave Reaver, right? You can use Teval's ability, delve as many times as you want to or as possible, and pay as much mana as you want to put into Aggressive Biomancy and make copies of Colossal Grave Weaver. So imagine 4 to 6 copies of that dragon. That is a very powerful board, and they're all flyers. Great card. So with its fight mechanic built onto Aggressive Biomancy, it reminded me of Azuri's Predation. Because Azuri's Predation says, for 5 and 3 green, for each creature your opponents control, create a 4/4 green Phyrexian beast creature token. Each of those tokens fight a different one of those creatures. To be honest with you, this card is very powerful. It wipes out a lot of creatures. Your opponents have to have a very powerful board state to survive 4/4s coming at them at nowhere. And your dragons are at least 5/5s here. So yeah, you can see this as a very powerful Azorius Predation. So we're on to our self-mill package in this deck tech. Did Bridge Chant for 4 black and green. It's an enchantment. My favorite card because I play with this in my Micro Tyrant. It says when it enters the battlefield, mill 10 cards. That's what we want to do. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose a card at random in your graveyard. If it's a creature card, return it to the battlefield. We have this deck loaded with 15 dragons. A dragon is coming back eventually. And this card gets even better because the less cards you have in your deck, most likely whatever specifically card is left in there will be back on the battlefield. Otherwise, this card says return it to your hand. So that means any other card such as a Planeswalker, enchantment, artifact, instant or sorcery goes back into your hand. Great card. So this is our self-mill package. Just 3 of the 11 cards that I put in the deck tech. By now, I'm just going to talk about the main card I really want to talk about. The other 2 are staples, which are Ripples of Undeath and Cemetery Tampering. I think they are budget friendly. Ripples of Death is going to be a little bit more expensive one, but I just want to show and give a little highlight towards the Tarkir Dragonstorm enchantment here. Awaken the Honored Dread for Sultai colors. It's a saga enchantment. The first lore says destroy target non-land permanent. That's great. You can get something, eliminate, remove a pesky problem that your opponent has put on the battlefield. Say goodbye to it. Next up is Lore 2, mill 3 cards. That's what we want to do, self-mill. Then Lore 3, you may discard a card. When you do, return target creature or land card from your graveyard to your hand. So essentially, you're just exchanging whatever card in your hand for something in your graveyard, whether it's a creature or land that you urgently need back. Moving on to the best card you will find in your bulk box if you're an old MTG player. I'm not gonna lie to you. I was shocked when I found this card and realized that it works with Teval, Arbiter of Virtue. And you're going to freaking love this card. Willowdusk, Essence Seer. A 3/3 Golgari and 1 legendary Dryad Druid. He says, tap 1, tap it. Choose another target creature. Teval, Arbiter of Virtue, of course. Put a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the amount of life you gained this turn or the amount of life you lost this turn, whichever is greater. Activate only as a sorcery. Let's unpack this. First of all, you can only activate this on your turn. And you get to decide which of the scenarios is best for you, right? So, scenario 1, we gain life through Lifelink through Teval, either through a fight spell or go into combat, right? The lowest life you can probably gain using Teval is 6 life. So that means when you tap and use Willowdusk ability, you get to put 6+1/+1 counters on Teval, making it a 12/12. That sounds awesome. This just allows you to grow the power of Teval. Now, sometimes there might be a scenario where you've lost more life than gained life. And guess what that scenario is? When you delve, you purposely are delving and you're casting a spell with Teval, right? So when I say delve, maybe you pumped a bunch of colorless mana and exile cards for an X spell, and it's a total of 10 CMC, right? That means you lost 10 life because you casted a spell with Teval. Okay? Then you activate Willowdusk ability. That means you get plus 10 or 10+1/+1 counters. You win either way. This is an awesome card. Make sure you hit the like button because you know this shit was fire. So, you're going to see this often in everybody's deck tech with Teval, Arbiter of Virtue, because Teval is just a game ender. It ends games. You can pump X spells tremendously, right? Obviously, we got to play Villainous Wealth for X and Sultai. It's a sorcery. Target opponent exiles the top X cards of their library. You may cast any number of spells with mana value X or less from among them without paying their mana cost. You pretty much stealing spells from your opponent's libraries and you're casting it, and it can say game over. God knows what players have. Players have some crazy stuff in their decks. Y'all know this by now. Y'all know this by now. If you're new to Magic, you'll learn this by now. You'll find cards that you freaking hate. Right. Next up, we got Torment of Hellfire. Uh, I honestly try to keep this kind of budget. I am amazed that this card is $30 right now as I'm making this video on March 28th, 2025. It wasn't that expensive before. It was like maybe 15 at one point when I got it. But I cracked it in a booster. So I had to include it because it's going to be recommended. Torment of Hellfire for X and 2 black sorcery. Repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. Yeah, this says, hey, if your opponents do not have the amount of cards in hand or permanents on the battlefield, non-land permanents, they will lose the game. Because X is how many times you pump mana into it. So once this is 10, that is disgusting. You clear the board, you clear players' hands, they are top decking, they have nothing left. This is just a game ender. And they lose 3 life if they can't do any of the following. And then you're making them leave, make a decision on what they're trying to keep. It's just a lose-lose situation for them. This is a card that has to be countered. Straight up. Moving on to the Will card cycle from Tarkir Dragonstorm. Now, after playtesting, I'm not gonna lie, Will of the Sultai is my favorite one. This card, I'm expecting to be like $2 or $3, but it's an auto include, y'all. It's an auto include. For 4 and a green, it's a sorcery. Choose one. If you control a commander as you cast a spell, you may choose both instead. Okay, first ability, target player mills 3 cards. Return all land cards from graveyard to the battlefield tapped. That is extremely fast mana ramping. Even if you get 3 lands out your graveyard, for 5 mana to get 3 lands from your graveyard onto the battlefield tapped is a great rate. Second ability, put X+1/+1 counters on target creature where X is the number of lands you control. It gains trample until end of turn. Obviously, we're going to target Teval with this ability, right? So if you got 10 lands, you're putting 10+1/+1 counters on Teval, making it a 16/16 with flying, lifelink, and trample. And when you deal damage to an opponent, you gain that much life. Or when you deal damage to a creature, you gain that much life. Disgusting, disgusting, disgusting. Great card. Next up is the Will of Abzhan for 3 and a black sorcery. Same scenario. You need your commander on the battlefield to choose both. First one is any number of target opponents each sacrifice a creature with the greatest power among creatures that players control and lose 3 life. Yep, get rid of their best creature, generally, or their highest power creature. But this is where I really like the card. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. To do both of these for 4 mana is crazy. That is an edict where you make all your opponents, any number of opponents, that's the worst part about that card. Actually, that's the best part about that card. Excuse me. You can choose which opponents sacrifice the highest power creature. You get to choose. So you can make friends or you can make enemies. Then you get to bring back a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. For 4 mana? Come on, man. What are we doing here? What are we doing here? All right, moving on to the deck list. So I need to put out a video on how I build decks. That's going to be one of my things. I try to build decks in 15 minutes. I got a nice little formula that I want to share with y'all. That will be an upcoming video. But this deck tech that you'll see, the deck list is in the description, is on Moxfield. It has 38 lands. I rock between 36 to 38 lands always. And I have at least 10 mana ramps or mana rocks going on. Okay. In this deck tech, there's also 11 pieces of self-mill, either through an instant sorcery, enchantment, creature, any other combination, because we need to load our graveyard. And with this glass cannon type of commander, you need to have the cards that you want to play available to play. And that is going to be through your graveyard or in your hand. It sounds weird, but Sultai is just like that. I think I just reading on forums and stuff, some players are just not comfortable with self-milling. Self-milling is such a great feeling, trust me, because you see what you can possibly play, and you're just one card away from getting it and putting it onto the battlefield or putting it into play. Next up in this deck type, there's 15 dragons. I mentioned that before. Most of them are 7 CMC, but do not fret. This commander allows you to cast them easily, effectively, and they're powerful dragons that your opponents will need to remove. And don't worry, you have reanimation in this deck. Next up, we got 6 fight spells. The fight spells are super important because we want to gain life in other ways besides attacking to mitigate the life loss from casting spells when Teval, Arbiter of Virtue, is on the battlefield. And I promise you, you lose life faster than you imagine. This is such a great commander. Awesome. Final thoughts coming up. Teval, Arbiter of Virtue. This is my favorite commander from the Tarkir Dragonstorm because it reminds me of Roxanne, Starfall Savant. You have access through your entire library through self-mill because this is what Sultai does, except this encourages you to play your big bad spells by either paying the mana through it or using the delve mechanic that is stapled on your commander. I also like having commanders or building commander decks where my commander is the focus, and when it's on the battlefield, it's staying on the battlefield, and you will not like dealing with it. That's the way I build my decks. And honestly, I need to put out another deck tech on this commander because I didn't build it the way I personally would build it. I built this deck just to show viewers that you can play dragons. I think a lot of people are excited with the Tarkir Dragon set and they want to be able to play dragons. Play dragons. They're high CMC. So this commander says, hey, we can mitigate that process of the high CMC and throw them on the battlefield. You got green in your color pip. You got black in your color pip. You can draw cards with blue. It does all this. So awesome commander. If you made it this far in the video, just shout out. Big thank you. Big thank you. Hey, man, hit the like, hit the subscribe button. Let me know what y'all think about this commander and this deck tech. Peace.